All right, get ready to flock together for this deep dive.
You're interested in birds of the Indian subcontinent.
We're talking about a region so packed with different bird species, it's practically bursting at the seams with feathers.
It's true.
The sheer scale of avian diversity in this one area is truly remarkable.
Okay, so get this. The Indian subcontinent is home to a mind-blowing 1,375 bird species.
That's like a whopping 13% of all the bird species on the entire planet.
To put that in perspective, North America, which is massive, has less than 800.
So what makes this part of the world such a magnet for birds?
It's like Mother Nature designed the Indian subcontinent as the ultimate bird sanctuary.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Tell me more.
Well, it boils down to three major factors.
First, the geography and climate are incredibly diverse.
Ranging from the towering Himalayas to scorching deserts to lush, humid rainforests.
You've got extremes like the Thar Desert, where temperatures can reach a scorching 55 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk.
No.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum.
On the opposite end, you have the Assam Hills, home to Cherrapunji, one of the wettest places on Earth.
Imagine a place that receives so much rain you'd need a boat to get around.
That's Cherrapunji for you.
Wow, talk about going from one extreme to the other.
No wonder birds find this region so appealing.
Okay, so we've got crazy diverse geography and climate. What's the second factor?
The Indian subcontinent sits at a biogeographical crossroads.
Imagine it as a giant melting pot of bird species.
Three major bird realms collide and mix: the Indo-Malayan, the Palearctic, and even a touch of the Afrotropical.
So we're talking about a real avian United Nations.
I'm picturing birds from all over the world, each with their own unique characteristics, coming together and creating this incredible tapestry of biodiversity.
Can you give me some examples of these feathered diplomats?
Absolutely.
Take the Ioras and Minivets, for instance.
These flashy little birds are classic representatives of the Indo-Malayan realm.
Then you have the accenters, hailing all the way from the Palearctic realm, think Europe and Northern Asia.
And representing Africa, we have the spotted creeper, a species that made its way to the subcontinent and decided to call it home.
That's amazing.
Imagine being a bird watcher in a place where you can see species from all of these different regions.
Okay, we've got diverse landscapes and a central location. What's the third factor that makes the Indian subcontinent so special for birds?
Believe it or not, the story isn't over yet.
New bird species are still being discovered on the Indian subcontinent.
It's like this region holds a treasure chest full of secrets, just waiting to be uncovered.
Now that's what I call exciting.
It's like the gift that keeps on giving for ornithologists and bird lovers like yourself.
Any particularly remarkable discoveries you can share?
There are two that come to mind.
First, there's the case of the pale rockfinch.
Imagine the surprise when this little bird, not previously known to live in the region, was discovered in Gujarat.
It was like finding a penguin in the desert.
And even more thrilling, in 2006, a completely new species, the Bugun leoshikla, was discovered in the Himalayan forests of Arunachal Pradesh.
Hold on. A completely new species in this day and age.
That's incredible.
You'd think we knew about all the birds by now.
It really adds another layer of fascination to this region, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
This discovery highlights that even with centuries of exploration, there are still so many mysteries hidden within the natural world.
This is especially true in a place as biodiverse as the Indian subcontinent.
I can see why you're so passionate about this region and its birds.
It's amazing that there are still so many discoveries waiting to be made.
Now, while the Indian subcontinent is clearly a haven for birds, it also faces its share of conservation challenges, right?
You're right, it's not all rosy.
The incredible biodiversity of the Indian subcontinent faces growing threats, which raises an important question.
How do we protect this avian treasure trove?
That is a really important question.
Where do we even begin?
Well, a good place to start is with endemic species.
These are the birds that are found nowhere else on Earth except in specific areas of the Indian subcontinent.
They are like the VIPs of the bird world, and their fate is closely tied to the health of their unique habitats.
So endemic species are like the canaries in the coal mine.
Their presence or absence can tell us a lot about the overall health of the environment.
Exactly.
The Indian subcontinent is home to a remarkable 164 endemic bird species, representing over 10% of its total bird population.
And to protect these species, scientists have identified specific areas called endemic bird areas, or EBAs for short.
EBAs They sound like exclusive bird clubs.
You could say that.
Imagine these EBAs as hotspots, places with exceptionally high concentrations of these range-restricted birds.
Think of them like the crown jewels of bird conservation.
The Indian subcontinent has 8 of these EBAs, each with its own unique set of feathered inhabitants and each facing its own set of conservation challenges.
8 unique EBAs, each more fascinating than the last.
It sounds like we have a lot to unpack.
That's right. 8 unique EBAs, each worthy of their own deep dive.
But for now.
Let's start with what many consider the crown jewel, the Eastern Himalayas.
Okay, the Eastern Himalayas.
That name alone evokes a sense of awe and wonder.
It's easy to imagine why this would be a bird haven.
Tell me what makes this EBA so special.
It's a truly magical place for birds and those who love them.
This EBA stretches across India, Nepal, and Bhutan.
It is home to an astounding variety of bird species.
Including 19 found nowhere else on Earth.
19 endemic species in just this one area.
Wow, that's incredible.
Can you paint me a picture?
What kind of birds are we talking about here?
Take the chestnut-breasted partridge, for instance.
This enigmatic bird is so rare, it's like spotting a mythical creature.
A mythical creature, that's a great way to put it.
I'm already adding that one to my must-see bird list.
What other avian treasures can be found in the Eastern Himalayas?
Another fascinating resident is the dark-rumped swift.
This threatened species has carved out a very specific niche for itself.
Breeding in just 2 locations within the Khasi Hills of Meghalaya.
That's incredible.
To think that out of all the places in the world,
This bird has chosen those 2 specific locations as its home.
it really makes you wonder about the intricate connections between species and their habitats.
It's a shame that human activity is putting so much pressure on these delicate ecosystems.
It's true, human impact is felt even in the most remote corners of the world.
Speaking of remote corners,
We can't talk about the Himalayas without mentioning the Western Himalayas, right?
another EBA with its own unique set of feathered inhabitants.
Absolutely.
The Western Himalayas are just as impressive in terms of bird diversity and endemism.
This EBA is home to 11 restricted range species.
But sadly, some are facing a very real threat of extinction,
Extinction is such a heavy word.
and a stark reminder of our impact on the planet.
Are there any specific cases that stand out?
One particularly poignant story is that of the Himalayan quail.
This elusive bird hasn't been officially sighted since the late 19th century.
Wait, so it might actually be extinct?
That's heartbreaking.
It's a real possibility.
Despite numerous expeditions and extensive searches,
The Himalayan quail seems to have vanished.
it's almost like a ghost story for bird enthusiasts.
You hear whispers of this incredible creature.
But no one has actually seen it in over a century.
It really underscores the fragility of these mountain ecosystems.
You're absolutely right.
And it's not just the Himalayan quail that's facing an uncertain future.
The western tragopan, a strikingly beautiful pheasant.
Is also struggling due to habitat loss and hunting.
It's a shame that something as magnificent as a pheasant could be threatened by human actions.
Sadly, it's a common story,
The cheer pheasant is another example.
facing an uphill battle for survival due to human encroachment.
And then there's the Kashmir flycatcher,
A bird that migrates all the way to Sri Lanka and the Western Ghats for the winter.
only to face threats in its breeding grounds in the western Himalayas.
It really highlights how interconnected these ecosystems are.
And how threats in one area can have ripple effects elsewhere.
It's like a delicate balancing act.
And we're throwing things off balance left and right.
Speaking of interconnectedness,
You mentioned the Kashmir flycatcher migrating to Sri Lanka.
that brings us to another EBA with a fascinating story to tell.
Ah, Sri Lanka?
A small island nation with a big personality.
Especially when it comes to its birds.
I'm all ears.
What makes Sri Lanka's bird life so special?
Sri Lanka boasts an impressive 26 endemic species.
That's more than any other EBA we've discussed so far.
26 endemic bird species.
On one small island.
Wow, that is remarkable.
But I imagine that being an island also makes these birds particularly vulnerable.
You're right. Island ecosystems are often very fragile.
And like many places,
Deforestation is a major threat in Sri Lanka,
large-scale monoculture plantations
where only one type of tree is grown.
are replacing natural forests at an alarming rate,
This practice is devastating for biodiversity.
especially for birds that rely on the rich tapestry of life found in natural forests
It's a classic case of short-term gain.
for a long-term pain.
We see the same thing happening in other parts of the world.
Sacrificing biodiversity for economic gain.
Are there any examples in Sri Lanka where we see this playing out in a particularly tragic way?
One heartbreaking example is the plight of the Sri Lanka whistling thrush.
This shy bird, known for its beautiful
It
song.
relies on the dense undergrowth of natural forests.
But as these forests disappear,
So too does this unique bird's home.
pushing it closer and closer to the brink.
And then there's the Serendib scox owl,
A species discovered relatively recently.
and already facing an uncertain future due to this very issue.
It's a stark reminder that even in places we perceive as pristine and untouched,
Like a tropical island.
the pressures of human activity are leaving their mark.
It seems that habitat loss is a common thread connecting many of these EBAs.
It is a recurring theme, unfortunately.
But the type of habitat loss can vary from region to region.
For instance, while deforestation for agriculture is a major issue in Sri Lanka.
The threats facing birds in the Assam lowlands are a bit different.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
What are the main challenges facing birds in the Assam lowlands?
This EBA is a clear reminder that extinction isn't just a thing of the past.
We're seeing it happen right now.
And the Assam lowlands is a prime example.
3 endemic species in this region are in a dire situation.
3 endemic species on the brink.
That's alarming.
What are they, and what sort of threats are they facing?
The first is the Manipur bush quail.
This elusive bird hasn't been seen since 1938,
It's feared to be extinct.
although there's always a glimmer of hope that it might still be clinging to survival somewhere in the remaining pockets of suitable habitat.
It's amazing to think that a creature can disappear like that.
Almost like a ghost in the bird world?
What about the other 2 species you mentioned?
The other 2, the marsh babbler and the black-breasted parrotbill,
Are also clinging to survival,
they depend on specific habitats like reed beds and grassland.
which are shrinking at an alarming rate due to human activities.
So in this case, it's not just deforestation.
But the conversion of these specific habitats that's pushing these birds towards the brink.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that conservation efforts need to be tailored to the unique challenges of each region and ecosystem.
It sounds like we need to be a lot more mindful of our impact on these incredibly specialized and fragile ecosystems.
Okay, before we move on from talking about specific EBAs,
There's one more we should touch on. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
these islands sound about as remote and exotic as you can get.
They truly are.
These islands offer a glimpse into a world less touched by human activity.
This isolation has resulted in a remarkable number of endemic species.
18 to be exact.
18 endemic species on these islands alone.
That's almost as many as in the entirety of the Western Himalayas.
That's just incredible.
But I imagine that being so isolated also makes them incredibly vulnerable.
You're spot on.
These islands are like time capsules.
Home to species that have evolved in isolation for millennia,
But this also makes them incredibly susceptible to outside threats.
especially those we humans bring with us.
I can only imagine.
What are the most significant dangers these island ecosystems are facing?
Human development poses one of the most significant threats.
Particularly deforestation for agriculture and infrastructure.
When you have limited space and unique species that exist nowhere else,
Any disturbance can have devastating consequences.
then there's the ever-present issue of invasive species.
The accidental introduction of a predator or competitor can wreak havoc on these delicate ecosystems.
It's like a fragile house of cards.
Where even the slightest disturbance can cause the whole thing to topple.
Can you share any specific examples of species on these islands that are in a precarious position?
The Nicobar megapode is a prime example,
This ground-dwelling bird is unique to these islands.
and habitat loss is pushing it closer to the edge.
Then there's the story of the Narcondam hornbill.
Another bird found on just a single island.
This bird had a close call when plans to build a radar station in its habitat were thankfully averted.
Talk about dodging a bullet.
It really emphasizes how crucial it is to consider the potential impact of human activity on these isolated ecosystems.
It does.
Even small actions, like introducing a seemingly harmless plant or animal.
Can have unforeseen and catastrophic consequences.
That's a lot to think about, that's for sure.
But as fascinating as these individual EBAs and their unique species are,
I'd love to zoom out a bit and get a sense of the bigger picture.
we've talked about the bird VIPs, the endemic species.
Now let's delve into the diverse landscapes that make up their home turf and the challenges those habitats face.
You're right, zooming out to look at the bigger picture is important.
When you think about the Indian subcontinent's incredible diversity of birds,
You have to consider the amazing range of habitats they call home.
so let's start with forests.
Since a whopping 7 out of the 8 EDAs we discussed are primarily forested.
That makes sense to me.
Forests are like giant cities for birds with something for everyone, right?
Food, shelter, nesting sites, you name it.
But I'm guessing these forests aren't all the same, are they?
You're absolutely right.
The Indian subcontinent is home to an incredible variety of forests.
Imagine trekking through steamy mangroves along the coast.
Then climbing to the evergreen rainforests of the Western Ghats.
Picture the dry, deciduous forests that lose their leaves in the scorching heat.
And then the thorny scrub forests clinging to life in the desert.
And of course, we can't forget the majestic Himalayan forests.
With their mix of broadleaf trees, conifers, and those iconic rhododendrons.
It's like a crash course in forest ecology.
So much diversity in just one region.
It's no wonder birds thrive here.
But with all the pressures facing the natural world,
I have to ask, what's threatening these amazing forest ecosystems?
well, like many forests around the world,
They are under pressure from so many sides.
deforestation is a major issue as trees are cut down for timber, fuel wood.
Or to clear land for agriculture,
Then there's overgrazing by livestock.
which can prevent new trees from growing and disrupt the natural balance of the forest,
And we can't forget about climate change.
which is already impacting rainfall patterns and increasing the frequency of forest fires,
It's a lot for these ecosystems to contend with.
especially considering their importance for so many species.
You mentioned that forests are just one type of habitat found in the Indian subcontinent.
What about wetlands?
They always seem to be teeming with bird life.
They really are,
Wetlands are like giant magnets for birds.
offering a rich source of food.
You've got your waders, your ducks, your herons, your storks, the list goes on and on.
And the Indian subcontinent has an amazing variety of wetlands.
From high-altitude glacial lakes to lowland marshes and swamps.
From the vast mangrove forests we talked about earlier to man-made reservoirs and rice paddies.
It's like a smorgasbord of options for wetland-loving birds.
But I'm sensing a but coming.
Are these vital habitats also facing their share of challenges?
Sadly, yes.
They face many of the same threats we see elsewhere. Pollution from industrial waste and agricultural runoff.
The diversion of water for irrigation.
And the conversion of wetlands for agriculture and urban development.
One particularly heartbreaking example is the plight of the spoon-billed sandpiper and Bear's pochard.
Both critically endangered species that depend on these wetland habitats for survival.
It's like a double whammy for these birds.
Losing their habitat and facing the impacts of pollution at the same time.
It's a stark reminder that everything is connected.
We can't just focus on protecting specific species. We have to look after their homes as well.
Speaking of different habitats, what about grasslands?
I always think of wide open spaces when I hear the word grassland.
What kind of birds do we find thriving in these environments?
You're right. Grasslands often evoke a sense of vastness and freedom.
And you're right about the birds,
Grasslands are home to a unique set of species.
many of which are specially adapted to life in these open environments.
Think of bustards, floricans, and coursers.
These birds often have camouflage that helps them blend in with the grasses.
And they rely on their speed and agility to catch prey or escape predators.
They sound like the avian equivalents of race car drivers.
Built for speed and maneuverability.
So where are these grasslands located within the Indian subcontinent?
And what kind of threats are they facing?
You'll find grasslands scattered throughout the region.
From the floodplains of the Indus and Brahmaputra rivers to the arid landscapes of the Thar Desert.
But just like those forests and wetlands we talked about,
Grasslands are under increasing pressure from human activity.
conversion to agriculture is a significant threat.
As the human population grows,
So does the demand for farmland.
and grasslands are often seen as prime real estate for growing crops.
So it's a familiar and unfortunate story.
Habitat loss continues to be the biggest villain in this tale of avian challenges.
Are there any particular grassland birds that you're especially concerned about?
Absolutely.
The lesser florican, a critically endangered species, is a prime example.
This bird relies heavily on grasslands for breeding.
And as these habitats vanish, so does the lesser florican.
It's a race against time to protect the remaining grasslands and give this species a fighting chance.
Another species facing an uphill battle is the great Indian bustard.
This magnificent bird, one of the heaviest flying birds in the world.
Has been pushed to the brink by habitat loss and hunting.
And then there's the swamp francolin, a species found only in the wetlands and tall grasslands of the Gangetic Plains.
Which is also facing an uncertain future.
It's both amazing and heartbreaking at the same time,
On the one hand, it's remarkable how adaptable these birds are.
finding ways to survive in such specific environments.
But it's also sobering to realize that their very existence is tied to these shrinking habitats.
We've covered forests, wetlands, and grasslands.
Is there any other type of habitat we should touch on before we move on?
Well, we shouldn't forget about scrublands.
These often overlooked habitats are characterized by shrubs, bushes, and small trees.
They might not seem as impressive as towering forests or as alive with activity as bustling wetlands.
But they are just as important for birds.
You're right.
Every habitat has its own unique beauty and ecological value.
And they all contribute to the overall biodiversity of a region.
Are there any standout bird species that call scrublands home?
One fascinating example is the Jerdon's courser.
This critically endangered bird was thought to be extinct for nearly 80 years before it was rediscovered in 1986.
Imagine the excitement of that rediscovery.
This bird depends on the scrublands, in a small part of eastern India.
And thankfully, conservation efforts are underway to protect it and its fragile habitat.
And then there's Stalitska's bush chat,
A bird that's adapted to the harsh, arid conditions of the Thar Desert.
where it's found in scrubby areas with very little vegetation.
Talk about resilience.
It's truly remarkable how adaptable birds can be.
Finding a way to make a living in all sorts of environments, from lush forests to parched deserts.
It really speaks to the power of evolution.
Speaking of adaptations, how can we forget about migration?
Birds are the ultimate long-distance travelers.
Connecting different parts of the world through their incredible journeys.
You're so right.
And, the Indian subcontinent is a crucial stopover point for many migratory birds.
Especially those following the Central Asian flyway.
One of the major bird migration routes in the world.
These birds, many of which breed in northern Asia,
Rely on the wetlands, grasslands, and forests of the Indian subcontinent to rest and refuel during their long and arduous journeys.
So the Indian subcontinent is like a giant B&B for weary, feathered travelers.
Offering much-needed rest and sustenance along their incredible journeys.
It's amazing to think about these birds traversing continents.
Relying on these specific locations along their route.
Are there any particularly impressive migratory feats that stand out in your mind?
Oh, absolutely.
One of the most astounding migrations have to be that of the bar-headed goose.
This remarkable bird actually flies over the Himalayas during its migration.
Reaching altitudes of over 9,000 meters?
Can you believe that?
That's higher than Mount Everest.
Wow, that's higher than most airplanes fly.
Talk about a high-flying adventure.
That's incredible.
The challenges these birds must face are unbelievable.
From harsh weather conditions to low oxygen levels.
It's really a testament to their incredible physiological adaptations that they can complete these epic journeys.
But sadly, even with all their resilience,
Birds in the Indian subcontinent and around the world are facing a very uncertain future.
what are your thoughts on this?
As someone who has dedicated their life to studying and understanding birds,
You're right.
despite their amazing adaptations,
Birds are facing unprecedented challenges from human activities.
pollution, habitat loss, and climate change are all taking their toll on bird populations around the world.
And the Indian subcontinent is no exception.
It's something that concerns me deeply.
Especially when we consider the vital role birds play in maintaining healthy ecosystems.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these challenges.
But it's important to remember that there is still time to act.
What do you think are the most important steps we can take to protect these incredible creatures and ensure that they continue to grace our skies for generations to come?
You're right, we can't give up hope.
I think one of the most important things is to raise awareness.
We need people to understand the importance of birds and the threats they face.
We need to make it clear that the future of birds is intertwined with our own.
And of course, we need to support conservation efforts on the ground.
Whether that means protecting critical habitats, reducing our own environmental impact,
Or supporting organizations working to protect birds.
every action, no matter how small, can make a difference.
It's a call to action for all of us.
Whether we're scientists, policymakers, or just everyday citizens, we all have a role to play in ensuring the survival of these amazing creatures.
Well, this has been an incredible journey.
From the soaring peaks of the Himalayas to the vibrant wetlands of the Gangetic Plains,
We've explored a world teeming with a dazzling array of bird life.
each species with its own unique story to tell,
Thank you so much for joining me today.
and for sharing your passion and knowledge with me and our listener.
It's been my pleasure.
Birds hold a special place in my heart.
And I'm always happy to share my enthusiasm with others.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the fascinating world of birds on the Indian subcontinent.
We hope you've learned something new, gained a deeper appreciation for these feathered wonders.
And perhaps even feel inspired to take action to protect them.
Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and happy birding.